Late one Saturday afternoon, I sat down at a small cafe on the Mexican side of the border, ordered a café con leche, and in the shadow of a giant fence, began to write. I had discovered so much that day, and I was grappling with so many conflicting impressions that I was desperate to get my thoughts on paper so that I could make sense of them. It had all started the week before when I discovered a scrapbook in my family's attic. The scrapbook had belonged to my bisabuela, my great-grandmother, who had pasted letters and photographs inside it when she was a young woman in Nogales. Nogales is a city shared by two different countries. Part of it is in Arizona, and part of it is in the state of Sonora, Mexico. It was in Nogales where my bisabuela, who was from the Mexican side, met my great-grandfather, an American. It was in Nogales that they wrote each other love letters and strolled across the open street that marked the border. The scrapbook made me feel more connected to my ancestors than ever before. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Later that week, when my English professor assigned a comparison and contrast essay, I knew instantly that I would compare and contrast the Nogales of my great-grandparents with the Nogales that exists today. I found some information online and at the library, but it wasn't enough. I wanted more than facts and figures. I wanted to feel a stronger connection to the world of those crinkled letters and faded photographs. I wanted to see, hear, smell, and taste it. I wanted to be there. So the next Saturday, I borrowed a friend's car and made the long drive down to Nogales. I spent several hours visiting historical societies, interviewing people, and taking pictures. And it was that afternoon when I sat down with a café con leche to get my thoughts together. My first instinct was to list and organize my ideas about the Nogales of the past and the Nogales of today. In English class, I had learned that there are two main ways to do this. One method is called block organization. In block organization, you state all your ideas about one subject, and then state all your ideas about the other subject. This approach didn't seem right in this situation, though. I wanted to organize my ideas in a way that would let me put the past side by side with the present. Consequently, I used point-by-point organization. In point-by-point, you address one point of comparison at a time. This pattern of organization made it easy to see the differences between the past and the present. As I worked, more and more points of comparison came to mind, and for a while it seemed as if I couldn't write fast enough. I wrote about how people used to be able to walk from one side of the border to the other, but nowadays that's impossible. A giant fence separates the citizens of the Mexican Nogales from the citizens of the American Nogales. I wrote that a spirit of community used to connect the people on either side of the border. They joined forces in emergencies and in celebrations, but with the fence and with cultural changes, that no longer seems possible. I wrote about how tourism used to be a major industry on the Mexican side, but that has given way to factories that pay low wages. For over an hour, I poured out my thoughts. When I finally paused and looked back over my work, I realized that I had more than enough information to include in an essay. What I was missing, though, was a thesis statement. Earlier in the semester, I would have written something simple, something like, Nogales today is very different than it was in the early 20th century. But I had learned a lot about expressing more sophisticated ideas, and now, confronted by a subject I really cared about, I realized just how empty a statement like that could sound. I needed to say something bigger, something that captured why it was important to compare this city's past to its present. What does all this mean? I asked myself. Why bother making this comparison? To work out the answer, I decided to freewrite for a while. Eventually, freewriting brought me to this idea. To compare the Nogales of the past to the Nogales of today is to see a picture of ourselves, to see how mistrust and greed have eroded human bonds. It was a strong statement and sad, but it felt true. Then, just as I stopped writing, a couple walked past my table. Watching them, I was overcome by a sense that I was missing something, that the modern Nogales was more than fences and factories, more than a ruin of my great-grandmother's past. As the couple reached the corner of the next street, they clasped hands, and suddenly I knew what I was missing. I picked up my pen. The picture may be bleak, I wrote, but as we examine it, we can also see that it is not without hope.